Montana Territory, August 1882, the wind rolled down from the Absaroka Range. Dry and restless, curling dust off the porch of a weathered homestead where no laughter had been heard in 5 years. Owen Callahan stood in the doorway, a rifle slung over his shoulder and silence wrapped around his shoulders like an old coat. The prairie stretched out before him wide, empty and honest. He had not spoken more than a dozen words in a week. There was no one left to speak to. His wife, Clara, had died giving birth to their stillborn son. Since then, the house had gone quiet. The horses obeyed, the cattle grazed, and Owen lived like a ghost in his own skin. Then one afternoon, while checking the north fence, he heard it laughter. A woman's laugh, clear and sudden, carried on the wind like a song he had forgotten. He froze, hand tightening around the reins of his horse. It was not a sound that belonged to the land anymore. Not here. Not his land. He followed it like a man chasing a dream. Half a mile north, where the scrub thinned into open pasture, stood a broken wagon. One wheel had splintered. A woman knelt beside it, sleeves rolled up, skirts dusty, hair pinned up in a way that said she had given up trying to keep it neat. 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl sat beneath the wagon in the shade, playing with a stick and a tin cup like it was treasure. The woman looked up, shielding her eyes. "You just gonna stare or offer a hand?" Her voice was warm, but it held grit. Owen blinked, then swung down from his horse. "You should not be out here alone. We were not until the wheel snapped and the man driving us took off on foot yesterday, said he'd bring help." She laughed again, dry this time. "Never came back." Owen looked at the children. They were both under 10. The boy was maybe 8, the girl younger by a year or 2. They looked up at him without fear. "You their mother?" "No, friend of their family. Their father caught fever in Cheyenne, died fast. Their mother passed 3 days later. I could not just leave them." He studied her. She was not fragile. Her cheeks were sunburned, her hands calloused. Her eyes, light green and steady, met his without hesitation. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lettie Orwood." "And yours?" "Owen Callahan." "Well, Owen Callahan, you look like someone who knows how to fix a wheel." "I do." "Then you're about to become my favorite person." He knelt beside the wagon, inspecting the damage. "This needs a full replacement. I have one in my barn." "About 3 miles south." "You offering?" she asked. "I am," she exhaled, relief softening her face. "Thank you." He looked at the children again. "What are their names?" "Franklin and Fiona," she said. "They have been through more than most should." Owen nodded. "You all can ride with me. We can walk," Lettie said, glancing at the horse. "It's a long walk." Her lips curved into a smile. "You always this talkative?" "No," he said honestly. "Well, I like your kind of quiet. It makes a person feel safe." That did something to him, something small but deep. He helped her up onto the horse, then hoisted both children behind her. He walked beside them, guiding the horse home. It took an hour to reach the ranch. The sun had fallen lower by then, turning the grass gold and the sky the color of ash. Owen helped the children down and opened the barn doors. The house sat behind it, 2 stories of worn pine and shuttered windows. "You live here alone?" Lettie asked. "I do." "Must get quiet." He thought about lying. Instead, he said, "It does." She followed him inside. The children settled near the hearth. Fiona found a ragged patchwork quilt and curled up. Franklin explored the room with quiet eyes. Lettie stood in the kitchen, hands on her hips. "Mind if I cook something?" He shook his head. "Stove's there, salt pork, beans, and flour in the pantry." She got to work without asking more. The way she moved brisk, familiar with hunger, said she had not eaten well in days. Owen poured water from the pump into a basin and watched her from the corner of his eye. "You married?" she asked without looking up. "I was." She nodded, not prying. Dinner was quiet but full. Lettie served the children first, then passed Owen a plate. She sat across from him, her knees brushing the table leg, her laugh softer now, like it knew it had to be careful in this house. After supper, she helped the children wash up and tucked them into the bed upstairs. Owen stayed by the fire, staring into it like he always did. But when she came down, he looked at her. "You do not have to stay out here alone," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I think you are used to it." He nodded once. She sat beside him anyway, not touching, just close. "You lost her here?" she asked. "Yes, you loved her," he paused. "I did." She looked into the hearth, then leaned back against the chair. "I loved once. He was not the marrying kind, but I loved him anyway. He died in Kansas, shot over a card game." Owen said nothing, but his chest felt less tight. Outside, the wind picked up and the horses shifted in the barn. Inside, the air changed, not louder, just warmer. Lettie turned to him. "You saved us today. I will repay that. You do not have to." "I want to." He met her eyes. They held no pity, only truth. He nodded. That night she slept on the settee downstairs. The children were safe upstairs. Owen lay awake in his bed, listening. He heard her laugh once in her sleep, a quiet, sudden thing that broke into the silence of the house like sunlight through a shutter. And for the first time in 5 years, Owen Callahan smiled. The sun crested slow and wide over the ridge, light pressing through the warped glass of the kitchen window. Owen stood at the pump washing his hands, the cold water biting his skin awake. Outside, meadowlarks called from fence posts, and dew steamed off the pasture grass in thin curls. He heard quiet footsteps behind him. Lettie, hair braided down her back now, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stood holding a tin cup. She didn't speak right away. Just filled the cup and drank, watching the morning take shape through the open door. "I can mend," she said after a moment. "If you've got anything torn." Owen dried his hands on his pant leg. "There's a trunk in the loft, linens mostly, a few shirts." "I'll see to them," she said. "Children are still asleep. They'll wake hungry. You have eggs." "Henhouse out back." "Might be 3 or 4. She nodded and stepped outside without another word. He watched her walk toward the coop, boots careful in the damp grass. She moved like someone who'd farmed before, who knew how to coax the world into giving what it could. He went to the barn, found the spare wagon wheel leaning behind a stack of dry fence rails. It wasn't new, but it would hold. He hoisted it onto the cart and hitched the mare, working slow, each motion settling him deeper into the rhythm of the day. By the time he returned to the kitchen, the stove was warm and a skillet hissed low. Lettie had tied a strip of muslin around her waist and was cutting potatoes into thin rounds. "I found 4 eggs," she said. "One was cracked," he nodded, sitting at the table. She didn't look at him, just slid the knife through the last potato. "Franklin said he wants to learn to ride," she said. "You think he could, if he listens close. He will." The children came down not long after, hair mussed and eyes blinking against the light. Fiona climbed onto the bench at the table, her legs swinging. Franklin stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. "Didn't think we'd get eggs," he said. "You've got Lettie to thank for that," Owen said. The boy glanced at her, then back at Owen. "You gonna show me how to saddle a horse?" Owen met his gaze. "After you eat." They ate with quiet clinks of forks and the scrape of tin plates. When the meal was done, Lettie rose and began clearing dishes. Owen stood too, but she waved him off. "You've got a wheel to replace," she said. "I'll see to this." He found Franklin waiting by the barn, already holding a curry brush. "You know anything about horses?" Owen asked. The boy shrugged. "Only what I watched, then you'll learn." They worked in silence, brushing down the bay gelding Owen had chosen. Franklin listened, asked once about the bit, and didn't flinch when the horse shifted. Owen noticed the way he checked the cinch twice, the way his hands moved careful, like he understood that animals remembered roughness. By the time the wagon was repaired and ready, the sun stood high. Lettie had packed biscuits and salt pork wrapped in cloth, tied it with twine, and handed it to Owen without fanfare. The children climbed up, and Owen helped Lettie onto the bench beside him. "You want to go back to Cheyenne?" Owen asked as they started down the trail. "No," she said, eyes on the horizon. "There's nothing there for them, for me." He didn't press. The road rattled under the wheels, summer bugs humming in the brush. Franklin pointed out a hawk circling high. Fiona leaned against Lettie's side and dozed. When they reached the broken wagon, Lettie climbed down first. She tucked a lock of hair behind her ear as she looked over the wreck. "I'll move the trunk and tools into the barn when I return," Owen said. She nodded. I'll help. No need. I'd rather do something than sit still. He didn't argue. They loaded what they could into the repaired wagon. Franklin carried a tin box of sewing supplies. Fiona hugged a doll missing one arm. Lettie tied a sheet over the trunk and climbed back up beside Owen. They rode back slow. The quiet between them was easy now, like something they shared instead of endured. At the ranch, Lettie helped unload. The children wandered toward the creek that ran past the edge of the property, skipping stones and laughing low. Owen stood by the porch post watching them. Lettie came up beside him, brushing dust from her skirt. You ever think about selling this place? She asked. No, you have family left. No. She didn't fill the space after that, just stood beside him, watching the water sparkle between the cottonwoods. A breeze lifted the edge of her braid. You planning to keep moving? He asked. Her eyes didn't leave the children. I was, but I don't know anymore. That settled between them, not heavy, just real. Owen looked at her hands, chapped and strong. You could stay. If you wanted. She turned to him, one brow lifted. And what would I be here? He met her gaze. You'd be needed. Lettie didn't smile, but her eyes softened. She looked out across the fields where the wheatgrass bent like waves and the sky reached further than most people ever traveled. I'll think about it, she said. And for now, that was enough. A week passed, marked not by grand changes but by the slow settling of new routines. Lettie rose before the sun, and Owen found her one morning kneeling in the garden plot behind the barn, coaxing stubborn green shoots from the earth with her bare hands. She'd found old seed sacks in the loft and planted carrots and beans without asking, as if the land had spoken to her in a language she already knew. Franklin spent his mornings in the barn, learning to braid rope and clean tack. Fiona followed the barn cat between the stalls, whispering to it like it was a secret keeper. Owen watched all of it unfold without interfering. The house no longer felt like a tomb. One evening, as the light shifted low and copper-colored across the fields, Lettie stood at the edge of the corral, arms folded, watching Franklin guide the gelding in a slow circle. He's got a steady hand, Owen said, coming up beside her. He's always been patient, she answered. Even when things fell apart. You teach him that, I tried, but some things come from the hurt itself. He never cried when his mother passed, just held Fiona and said they'd be all right. Owen tipped his hat back, letting the breeze cool his brow. You think he believes it? He asked. I think he needs to, same as I did. The air held the scent of crushed sage and warm leather. A meadowlark sang from the fence rail, its call long and winding. You ever think about taking in a boarder before we came? Lettie asked, not looking at him. No, why not? Didn't see the point. I wasn't making room for anything anymore. But you did. He looked at her, the way her hair caught the wind, the way her eyes stayed fixed on her own thoughts. It wasn't a choice, he said. You just fit. Her mouth twitched, not toward laughter, but something quieter. She bent to pick up a loose fence nail and rolled it between her fingers. I was a milliner's apprentice once, she said after a pause. Back in Missouri, before everything, thought I'd open my own shop, got as far as sewing hat bands and counting coins. What changed? A man came through town. Promised the world, took me as far as Kansas City. She dropped the nail into the tool bucket. He left me with a name I couldn't use and a child I never carried to term. Owen didn't speak, didn't offer comfort she hadn't asked for. I buried the baby myself, she continued. In the rain. Didn't even tell the landlady. He reached down, not to touch her, but to pick up the hammer at her feet and hang it on the post. I've never told Franklin or Fiona, she said. Didn't see the good in it. You don't have to tell everything to be good to them. She turned then, finally meeting his gaze. Have you ever thought about marrying again? No. Would you, if it made sense? He studied her, saw the wear in her shoulders, the steadiness in her gaze. If something grows out of what's true, not just need, I'd see it through. She nodded once, as if filing that away. Later, as dusk fell and the children curled up on a quilt beneath the porch steps, Owen brought out 2 cups and a bottle of blackberry cordial he'd never opened. Lettie raised a brow but took the cup. I didn't expect you to have something sweet on hand. Clara made it. I never touched it after. Lettie sipped, slow and thoughtful. She'd have liked you sharing it, I think so. They sat side by side, legs stretched out, boots dusty and heels worn. The horizon darkened to deep blue, stars beginning to blink through the velvet sky. I never thought I'd end up here, Lettie said. Thought I'd die in a boarding house or some church-run hospital. You won't. The way he said it quiet and sure settled something in her chest that had been shifting loose for years. She looked at him, really looked, and didn't glance away. You know, Owen Callahan, you might just be the first man I've met who never promised more than he meant. And you might be the first person who didn't expect me to be someone else. She leaned her shoulder against his, not soft but steady, the kind of closeness that asked for nothing but allowed everything. They watched the stars come out, one by one, until the night wrapped around them like a promise neither had to speak aloud. By early September, the land had begun to shift. The grass along the creek bank dulled from green to gold, and the sky took on a heavier blue, the kind that warned of colder nights to come. The cottonwoods rustled differently, too, less like a dance, more like a whisper. Owen stood at the edge of the pasture, a length of leather reins in hand, watching Franklin guide the new colt in slow circles. The boy's shoulders had straightened over the weeks, his voice more certain when he called to the horse. Owen didn't offer corrections anymore. He only watched and listened for what didn't need saying. Lettie was at the sewing table by the front window when he came back inside, her needle moving in quiet rhythm. She was mending one of Fiona's dresses, the hem nearly worn through. She didn't glance up when the door opened, just said, "There's a pie cooling on the sill. First one I've made in 2 years." He took off his hat, set it on the hook near the stove. "What kind?" "Gooseberry. Found a patch past the bend by the creek." Fiona helped gather them. He stepped to the window. The crust was brown just right, the filling dark and sticky at the edge. "You planning to eat it or just admire it?" "I'll wait," he said. "You should be the one to slice it." She tied off her thread and stood, brushing her hands clean. "You always this particular with pie?" "I wasn't before." She looked at him then, holding his gaze longer than usual. "You're changing, you know." "I'm noticing things again," he said, quiet. She didn't answer, but her eyes softened. Later that evening, Fiona fell asleep on a quilt in the sitting room with her feet tucked beneath the dog. They'd taken in 2 days prior, a stray that had followed Franklin home from the South Ridge. Franklin had named it Birch, for the white streak on its chest. Lettie poured water into the washbasin and sat on the porch steps. Owen joined her, bringing the pie and 2 forks wrapped in a cloth. They ate in silence, the crust flaking between their fingers, tart fruit catching on the tongue. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if none of this had happened?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I used to think about what I'd still be doing if it hadn't." She nodded. "That's the difference between grief and forward thinking. You think I'm moving forward. I think you're standing still with less weight on your back." He set down his fork, leaned back against the post. "And you? I used to think I'd end up in some town I didn't belong to, working for people who didn't know my name. Now I wake up and know where the coffee pot is. That's something." He reached for her hand, not urgent, just steady. She let him take it. "I've been thinking," she said. "Winter's coming on. Children'll need proper coats. That barn's got bolts of canvas and I could stitch some lining in. I'll help with the cutting. You any good with shears?" "No, but I've got a steady hand." She smiled. "We'll see." The porch lantern swung slightly in the breeze, casting long shadows across the boards. He didn't let go of her hand. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked. "Only lately." She turned toward him fully. "I don't need saving, Owen. I've been through too much to believe in rescue." "I'm not offering rescue," he said. "I'm offering steadiness, a place we make, not a place I give." She studied him, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she said, "You think the children would be all right with it? They already look at you like you belong. And you, I look at you the same." She leaned into him then, not tentative, not testing, just sure. He slid his arm around her shoulders, and they sat like that until the stars blinked out one by one. Inside, the pie dish sat empty on the table, and the dog lifted its head once before curling back into sleep. The house breathed around them, no longer hollow, no longer echoing with silence, but filled with the quiet weight of something beginning to take root. A hard frost came early that year, curling silver over the fence rails and stiffening the creek's edges to glass. The barn filled with the sound of sawing and hammering as Owen and Franklin worked through the mornings, patching the roof and reinforcing the feed bins. Lettie had taken to boiling lye soap in a kettle behind the house, sleeves rolled high, cheeks pink from the cold. Fiona helped stir and gathered pine needles for scenting, her small hands red and raw from the wind. By mid-October, the last of the summer's hush had given way to the rhythm of preparation, not frantic, but sure. The feeling of waiting had disappeared. In its place was a kind of quiet steadiness, like a string pulled taut between four hearts and the land that held them. One evening, when the sun dipped early and the sky turned the color of coal ash, Owen brought down a wooden chest from the attic. He set it on the kitchen table without explanation. Lettie looked up from hemming Franklin's new coat. "Clara's?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Some of it," she waited. He opened the lid and pulled out a folded quilt, worn at the edges, the pattern faded but still clear 12 patch stars stitched in green calico and brown wool. He laid it across the table, smoothing it flat. "She made it our first winter here. Said we'd need something that looked like spring when spring felt far off." Lettie touched the edge with her fingertips. "She had good hands," she said softly, "even stitchwork. I want you to have it." She looked at him, brows drawing together. "This house is full of things that used to belong to someone else," he said. "But this can belong to us now." Lettie folded the quilt carefully and set it aside. "I'll keep it on our bed." It was the first time either of them had said it like that, our bed, and neither of them looked away. They married on the last Sunday of October, under the cottonwood by the creek that had already dropped most of its leaves. Franklin stood straight in a clean shirt Owen had lent him, Fiona clutching a bundle of wild asters Lettie had braided into a ring. The preacher from town came out in a borrowed buggy, his hands chapped from the drive. There was no crowd, no music, no decoration but the rustle of the wind and the sound of the creek threading through the roots. Lettie wore a dress she'd sewn from smoke blue muslin, her hair pinned back with one of Clara's old combs. Owen wore his father's vest, the buttons dulled with age after the vows were said and hands joined. Fiona tugged at Lettie's skirt. "Are you my mama now?" Lettie knelt, brushing a lock of hair from the girl's cheek. "If you want me to be." Fiona nodded once, serious. Franklin didn't speak, but when Owen offered his hand, the boy took it without hesitation. That night, they ate roasted chicken and cornbread beside the hearth. Lettie had baked a pie from dried apples and cinnamon bark, and Franklin passed around the tin cups without being asked. Birch lay curled under the table, tail thumping now and then. When the children had gone up to bed and the fire had burned down to coals, Owen took Lettie's hand and led her out to the porch. The stars were sharp and bright, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. "I never thought I'd marry again," she said, her voice low. "I never thought I'd have a reason to," he answered. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "This place," she murmured, "feels like it's ours now." "It is." He kissed her then, not rushed, not hesitant. It was a kiss that came from the bone, from the long ache of waiting and the quiet knowing that they had built something that would hold. Years passed, and the land changed with them. The barn was rebuilt with strong beams and new shingles. The garden grew wider each spring, and the quilt stayed on their bed through every season. Franklin took to carpentry, and by his 18th year he'd built a small cabin near the south fence, though he still came every Sunday for supper. Fiona became a teacher, walking 2 miles each morning to a one-room schoolhouse Owen helped raise with neighbors. She kept a tin box of pine-scented soap in her desk drawer, a gift from Lettie the year she turned 12. Lettie still rose early, her steps sure, her hands steady. Owen's hair turned silver at the temples, but his stride never lost its purpose. They shared coffee each morning on the porch, speaking little and meaning much. And when winter came each year, sharp and clean, they kept the fire lit, the pie tins full, and the quilt spread wide across the bed. They shared a life stitched not from what had been lost, but from what had been chosen, day by day, hand in hand.